Over the years, our family's had its share of health problems.
So prescriptions are a part of our life.
Before we went to the big box store.
We both thought it would help us save. But with the long lines and impersonal service, filling prescriptions became a chore. That's when a friend recommended D&H.
Now Tristan knows our prescriptions. Brenda always helps us find the right vitamins. And after Dad's fall, Monica's been a real expert with all our home medical needs. All without the lines.
Trust and service.
That's our D&H.
Good morning and welcome to Radio Friends on Thursday, June the 2nd. Our next guest has been with us 2 times, I believe, in the past. He is a professor of geological science, ERIC SANDVOL, University of Missouri. Good to have you here, Eric.
Nice to see you again, Paul.
And each time you've been here, you're an earthquake specialist, I like to say. Each time you've been here, we've talked about earthquake and earthquake preparedness. When I've asked you about the central Missouri area, you seem to think that there really isn't a very likely event in our future as far as earthquake. That doesn't mean it couldn't happen, though.
Yeah.
But what is causing earthquakes? Some of the causes are man-made, according to science, right?
That's correct, Paul. And so typically, and a lot of our conversation in the past is about how we generate earthquakes along plate boundaries. We have big tectonic plates that are moving, and they move with respect to one another, and that motion generates earthquakes. But there's also man-made earthquakes, what we call induced earthquakes.
Induced earthquakes. Now, some people are going to say, just like global warming, hey, that doesn't exist, and there are no man-induced earthquakes. But science would dare to differ here, right?
Yeah, I think so. And I will say this, that this studies of these induced earthquakes is newer than global warming. Global warming research has been going on, believe it or not, for 100 years or more, really. But in terms of induced seismicity, we're still in the early stages. But quite honestly, the science is pointing really strongly that it's man that's generating these earthquakes. And we have very strong correlation. Correlation doesn't always equal causation, but we have such strong correlations here, it's hard to argue it's not.
Now, didn't 60 Minutes do a special feature on it?
That's right. They did recently.
Just in the past 3 months, in Oklahoma, there have been how many earthquakes?
Over 300. And the level of the number of earthquakes has increased by orders of magnitude over the past about 7-8 years. Since about 2007, 2008, a huge increase in the number of earthquakes that have happened in southern Kansas and in Oklahoma and in Arkansas. And huge numbers, and almost all of these earthquakes, or many of the earthquakes, can be tied to the disposal of wastewater related to hydrocarbon production.
Fracking.
Fracking. So fracking is the initial part. So when an oil company goes in, they will frack in order to generate what we call permeability, which allows all the little isolated pockets of oil and gas to get connected so they can pump out that oil and gas.
Okay, so when you do fracking, or when the oil companies do fracking, they are pumping water into the ground?
And not just water, all kinds of interesting fluids that will expand and cause fractures and cracking within that.
Well, that's why it's called fracking.
That's right.
It
You're
causes
fracturing.
fracturing.
That's right.
And then when you're pumping all of this into the ground, you're bringing up gas and oil.
That's right.
But what are you doing to the ground and the environment when you're fracking?
So you do that fracking, that pumping of those specialized fluids down into the ground to generate that permeability. You do it once, and then after that, for years after that, you pump oil out. But when you pump that oil out, what comes out is some of those fluids you pumped into the ground, but a lot more. You're also, in addition to interconnecting all the oil and gas spaces, you're connecting spaces with salt water. Very salty, very brackish water.
So we have salt water in the ground under us.
Absolutely.
So you're bringing up this salt water.
Right.
What happens to the salt water that you're bringing up along with the gas and oil?
So that's the problem. The problem is, what do you do with all of this very salty water? It's too salty to drink. It's too salty to use for irrigation or for livestock. There's no use for it. So it's a big problem because you get about 10 times as much wastewater as you do oil and gas. So you got to do something with it.
So you're telling me that it's a 1 in 10 ratio?
Yeah.
You're getting 10 times more
salt water
than you are gas and oil.
That's correct.
The salt water has to be pumped back into the ground.
That's the cheapest thing to do. Rather than have to process it and get rid of all that salt and actually make it drinkable or potable, you have to you'd either have to process, but a much cheaper solution is you just pump it back in the ground.
And what happens when you pump it back into the ground?
Well, it really looks like you start triggering earthquakes, lots of earthquakes. And that's what we've seen in the past 8 years in Oklahoma, Arkansas, and southern Kansas now too.
Now, have any of these been major earthquakes?
It's an excellent question. So, there has been a major earthquake near Oklahoma City. It was a magnitude 5.6, and it did cause damage. And even some of these modest magnitude 4s, if you're located very close to magnitude 4, it can cause some damage to your house. And so whether that 5.6, that individual earthquake, was triggered by oil and gas production is a matter of some debate. But if you asked me, I would suggest probably. It probably was, but we can't say for certain. And that's an issue, a big important issue, because there's an issue of liability on the part of the oil companies to the damage to people's houses that was caused by that earthquake. Little small ones, magnitude 2s and 3s, they won't cause any damage, it's not a big deal. But these bigger ones that cause damage, it's an area of actually where government and law come in to have to deal with these problems.
You know, I'm sitting here listening to you, and it almost appears that anything man does, one way or another, we are disturbing the balance of nature.
So this is always what I teach in my classes, is that there's always a tension. There's always a give and take. Whether you want to be 100% safe or whether you want to develop real estate in an earthquake area, there's always and you have to, it's always a tension there, and it's always tricky. But oil and gas provides us energy. Energy provides us all of the lights that you see here, all the computers I do my research on. Energy is very important for raising standards of living. But you have a tension in that. In this case, generating that energy also can generate earthquakes, and sometimes, if it's not done correctly, can pollute groundwater. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So there's always a kind of tension there. What has been doing, what they're trying to now limit the amount of wastewater that they're pumping back into the ground to see if the number of these earthquakes will sort of go down a little bit.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of earthquakes, and if you look at a map of seismicity, you can see how many earthquakes there are.
Okay, we're almost out of time, and this probably may not be a question you can answer, but couldn't we set up some type of desalinization and be able to use that water, since there is a water shortage or across a large part of the world?
So you're absolutely right. And in fact, other fracking operations, that's what they have to do, because they do not have the subsurface permeability to pump the water back in. They have to deal with this
and
wastewater.
They can use it, then it's fresh water.
But it's expensive.
All right. We're out of time. Everything is expensive. If people want more information, where can they go?
They can look up at the Missouri Seismic Safety Commission or the USGS website that talks about induced seismicity, and they can learn a lot more about it.
ERIC SANDVOL, always a pleasure. You are really one interesting guy. Please come back again.
You bet.
Okay? Friday, tomorrow, we've got Love Inc. on. Our program directed by Travis McMillen, Reynolds Journalism Institute. Audio, Pat Akers, KBIA. Our floor director is Nathan Wright, and our assistant producer and guest coordinator, Uncle James Mouser. Have yourself a good day.